Oh well, an exciting time awaits us as we come to the second to last week, the penultimate week, if you will. I feel like using big words in the life of Abraham. And so we will see this morning the Lord doing something significant in his provision for Abraham and his provision for Isaac specifically. We saw how the Lord provided a substitute for Isaac, and we're going to see this morning how the Lord provides a wife for Isaac, and that is on the horizon. I will tell you, in case you have maybe come across this before, I know years and years ago there was this book, and I'm not going to mention the author's name because I think it was a guy who did not finish well, we'll just put it that way. It was talking about marriage, using Isaac and Rebekah as an example. And I'll tell you this morning, don't by and large let this be an example, all right? If you're single, don't pursue the approach that you're going to see this morning. There's a lot more going on here, redemptive historically, so you shouldn't look for a family member to marry. You shouldn't have a servant go out and find a family member for you to marry. You shouldn't, there are a lot of things here culturally that are going on that we'll talk about. So what I do want you to see, however, is that God is so kind and gracious in Abraham's life and Isaac's life and the lives of all of his people to do things for us, and to be at work in a million different ways that we don't understand. Even if we're aware of like two or three, there's all kinds of things going on all the time that God is working to accomplish his purposes for us. And so we see that displayed in the life of Isaac, in the life of Rebekah, and in the life of Abraham. As we turn to Genesis 24, and I'm not going to read the whole passage for you, in part because the servant of Abraham actually repeats the story as he is talking to Laban, whom, if you are familiar with, is quite a fellow, all right? I'm not really looking forward to hanging out with him for the number of weeks that we'll be talking about Jacob's life, but he is a character, he's a colorful chap, and we kind of get our introduction to him here as Abraham's servant interacts with him. So Genesis 24 is where we will be. I'll read the first 4 verses for you so you can get a picture of what's going on here. And this is after the death of Sarah. Now Abraham was old, and yes, that is true, he was old, well advanced in years, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. And Abraham said to his servant, the oldest of his household, who had charge of all that he had, put your hand under my thigh, that I may make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and God of the earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I dwell, but will go to my country and to my kindred and take a wife for my son Isaac. So again, there's a lot of cultural stuff happening here, and we'll see some of it, but I don't want you to lose sight of the forest for the trees at this point, because narrative passages in Scripture exist in part so that we see big picture, right? So we have different types of writing in the Bible, different types of forms. We'll have what might be called didactic, another fancy word for you, which just means teaching. So the Apostle Paul has a lot of didactic work. You have poetic work, so you get to the Proverbs and Ecclesiastes and the Psalms, like, oh, this is poetry. There's something happening here. But narrative passages are interesting because sometimes we can like really narrow in unnecessarily on certain details because we think that we're like going to do this great service to the Scriptures by focusing on like this little one word, like, oh, this one word unlocks the whole Bible, okay? That's not what we're going to see here, okay? What we're going to see is a pattern that God has continued to establish throughout the life of Abraham, which is he takes care of his people, and he is working at all times providentially to ensure that his purposes for his people will come to pass. So keep that in view as you're thinking about what's going on with Isaac and Rebekah. And your big idea for the morning, in light of that, is this. God is faithful to fulfill his promises in matters small and great. All right, so matters small and great. Think about the hair on your head, right? Jesus said every single one of them is numbered. Okay, every single one of them. Okay, that's a small matter, the hair on my head. I can't number the hairs on my head. Jesus said that the hair of your head is numbered by the Lord. It is a real thing for us to internalize, that God is active in matters small and active in matters great. All right, so the big things that happen, marriages and deaths, jobs, these things matter to God, and he is faithful to fulfill his promises in matters small and great. So that, and here's the connection to where obedience to Christ flows. All right, if this is true, that the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, is the same God who is attendant to these things in our lives, small and great things, if this is true, it's so that your uncompromising faithfulness should never be in question. When I say uncompromising faithfulness, what I'm saying is when God calls you to obedience, when he calls you to honor him, when it seems like an impossible task is set in front of you and it's like, the only way I can really do this is if I compromise. The only way I can really do this is if I sin. And maybe the other side of it is, well, God will understand. God will understand. Now, God has been so kind. You look in Abraham's life, he's been so kind, patient with this man. But as we've seen in Abraham's life, it's not a good practice. It's not a good practice to push God's patience to a limit because consequences do follow, right? It's not in the Bible, but it's a true statement. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes, right? And Abraham has certainly won some stupid prizes in his life, and God has been gracious to see them through. That being said, if God is the God of Abraham and Isaac, then you have every reason to think about your calls to obedience and think, God is faithful to me, so I can be faithful to him. Always. So a man who learned a lesson, and this is encouraging. Verses 1 through 8, again, I'll read this. The first half we've already read, and the next 4 verses will follow. Abraham was old, well advanced in years, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. And Abraham said to his servant, the oldest of his household, who had charge of all that he had, put your hand under my thigh, that I may make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and God of the earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I dwell, but will go to my country and to my kindred and take a wife for my son Isaac. The servant said to him, perhaps the woman may not be willing to follow me to this land. I mean, that's a real question, right? You're going, find some strange lady. It's like, follow me, right? Stranger danger, right? You want to be careful, especially ladies, be careful, right? Perhaps the woman may not be willing to follow me to this land. Must I then take your son back to the land from which you came? So the servant of Abraham is saying, all right, Abraham, I've known that you've been pragmatic in the past, right? You've said conclusions for obedience. It's been good to be obedient, but it hasn't always, like you've done some things that have kind of cut corners. Am I going to have to do that? Am I going to have to do that, Abraham? I've seen it work out, and it ultimately kind of panned out, but not without consequences, and something I'm going to have to do to cut corners. And here is Abraham's response. See to it that you do not take my son back there. The Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from the land of my kindred, and who spoke to me and swore to me, to your offspring I will give this land, he will send his angel before you, and you shall take a wife for my son from there. But if the woman is not willing to follow you, then you will be free from this oath of mine, only you must not take my son back there. Now that's a really, if you think about the arc of Abraham's life, we're thinking here's the guy who starts out pagan in a pagan land. God calls him. He goes a little bit, and then he stalls out for a while, and then he says some things and does some things that are highly, highly unhelpful, right? Unadvisable. So, did I catch the guitar? Oh, I knew it was going to happen. Wonderful. After decades of God's kind and patient work in his heart, Abraham had learned that trusting God to work was the only and best option for anything truly good. All of these things, this arc had occurred. Decades and decades, he had obeyed and disobeyed, and there's been this trend, right? He's gone up and down and up and down, decades and decades. He goes, and he finally arrives at this point where his son, who is in his late 30s now, okay? Now, this is not an instance of he hasn't just like stalled out, not living in his mom's basement. That's not what's happening. He's close to his family, right? But these are different times, so he's with his family, right? So sons stay with their families until they start their own families. And so there's no wife here for Isaac. And so what has to happen is there's this going to be, Abraham directs his son, and what you need to catch with this is that Abraham is setting his servant up to be obedient. He's setting his servant up to be obedient to God so that he's like, okay, now this is what's going to happen. Right, what's going to happen is God is going to fulfill his purpose. He's going to fulfill his promise to provide for the continuation of this line, right? Because his promise wasn't just Isaac, right? There's more to follow. And so God's going to provide for this. And he's not going to provide through another Hagar. Abraham learned his lesson. He's going to provide through somebody, and this is where it gets a little strange for us today, somebody from within his own house. We might say within the church today, perhaps you're a single person, you're thinking, I'm very, very lonely. I'm uncomfortably lonely. I'm looking for a spouse, and it just seems like it'd be easier to go outside, right? To go to the pagan lands, as it were, to find companionship. And God would say, please stay in your home, right? And so Abraham is encouraging Isaac's obedience here, saying there are a lot of ladies around right now, but you need to stay within the household of faith. Abraham learned a lesson. Genesis 16, 1-4, let's just remind you again of this. I do keep dipping back into Abraham's life so that we are aware. We can't just take for granted the fact that we know the story. Right? If you know the story, I want you to see, and I want you to take note of little details in this that are important to understand what's the, thought process that's being followed. So back when Sarah was alive, before she was Sarah, she was still Sarai. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. She had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said to Abram, behold, now the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go into my servant. It may be that I shall obtain children by her. And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. So after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian, her servant, and gave her to Abram, her husband, as a wife. And he went into Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress. So there are two things that I would draw your attention to here in relationship to what's happening with Isaac and the search for a wife for Isaac, is that you have a phrase that shows up earlier in Genesis chapter 3, and then you have a pattern that is going to follow until the end of Malachi. And the phrase that shows up earlier is when God condemns Adam, right? When God faults Adam, Eve sins first, and yet Adam is faulted. He is the one that stands in leadership over Eve and over the human race. He says to Adam, because you listened to the voice of your wife. And that's not a condemnation of godly counsel from women. It's not a statement that suggests women should just be quiet, be seen and not heard, that kind of a thing. It's not what's being said there. What's being said there is, Adam, you have failed to trust me. You failed to follow me. And you have listened to some foolish counsel. And you should know better. You are faulted, Adam. You should know better. And in Abram's case, what's happening here is, it says, Abram listened to the voice of Sarah. Abram listened to the voice of his wife. That is not just a mere coincidence. This is a deliberate use of language that is being employed by Moses, where he's saying the problem that is occurring here is that Abram, instead of trusting the God who has called him, who has directly interacted with him and said, Abram, this is going to happen. I'm going to take care of it for you. Instead, he listens to some foolish counsel. He listens to foolish counsel. And so we think, all right, this is in the back of Abram's mind. He's thinking, what types of heartache did I experience with Ishmael? What went on with that? What strife was caused between Hagar and Sarah? I mean, all these different things are going on. But then the place from which Hagar had hailed was Egypt. And that is not an insignificant thing, because in the Old Testament, to go down to Egypt was to go and basically give up your identity as the people of God and to say, my lot is with this world, and this world can take care of me just fine. That's what's being represented here. And so when Moses is saying, Hagar, the Egyptian, he's saying Abram's decision to go after Hagar, to listen to the voice of his wife instead of trusting God, was a deliberate attempt to say, I'm going to fulfill God's promises on my own. I'm going to make sure I can take care of this myself. And so when we get to his search for a son for Isaac, or for a wife for Isaac, his son, what's happening? He's saying, I learned my lesson. I'm not going to let my son do this. If you're a parent, as a Christian parent, I trust that you can look back on your life and see things that you've done that have been foolish, mistakes that you've made. That is, you think about, your counsel to your own children, whether they be young or old, that you can say, I've made foolish decisions. And please understand, it is wise to trust God. It is wise to be obedient. It is wise to say, God, I don't know how this is going to happen, but I know you will take care of it. So I will trust you, and that's where I'm going to leave it be. Exodus 14, 10 through 14. This is how Moses deals with the Israelites. This is hundreds of years, of course, after Abram had died. When Pharaoh drew near, the people of Israel lifted up their eyes. So they've left the land of Egypt. They're on the precipice of crossing the Red Sea, and their backs are pressed up against it. And they're like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? What are we going to do? God commanded us to leave this place, and yet we're here. What's going to happen? When Pharaoh drew near, the people of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they feared greatly. Right, so that's a frightening thing. You don't need to be necessarily concerned if you feel frightened over something. It's how you deal with that fear, right? How you're engaging with that fear, what you do with it. That's how we start getting into trouble, right? Things can be frightening. You have a bear chasing after you. You don't get faulted. It's like, oh, I am worrying about a bear chasing after me. You should be frightened that a bear is chasing you. In this case, the Israelites are frightened because they have an army going after them. It's an issue. But what happens? What do they do with it? They said to Moses, is it because there are no graves in Egypt? You've taken us away to die in the wilderness. What have you done to us in bringing us out of Egypt? Is not this what we said to you in Egypt? Leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians. For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. So what they're doing is they're simply kind of reworking what Abraham had done, which is to say, look, God did promise, he did call us, but I don't think it was supposed to be like this. Obviously, it's not working. It would have been better if we just kind of took care of things ourselves. And yet you see Moses' response, because you think about Moses' own life, right? Guy's in his 40s. It's like, well, let's go and let's kill a guy, right? Now, that wasn't just a fun murder type of thing, but he rises up, he strikes somebody dead because he thinks that he can avenge the blood of the Israelites who had been abused at the hands of the Egyptians, and he can do that himself. He can do that himself. He does this, and it's just this very, very poor decision, of course. And so Moses had learned for decades then that it is good to trust God to take care of what he has promised to take care of. And so Moses' response to the people is this: fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. Right? Saying, God promised and he called, so he's going to do it. Don't let this be anything other than just trust. He promised he's going to take care of it. If you're going to start worrying about this, it's going to cause problems for you, Abraham. Moses said to the people, fear not, stand firm and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent. So this is a lesson that had been learned. This is a lesson that should have been learned and yet was forgotten time after time after time, right? And this is something in your own Christian experience. Perhaps you have found this dynamic where you are thinking, okay, I've seen God work and I've been so afraid it's not going to happen. It does happen, right? He does take care of something. And then it just kind of settles down again. And you think, this next thing I can't trust. Like, I get how it happened last time, but this time it's just too much. It's too big of a thing to take care of. And so we have to go back and learn the same lesson over and over. But what a beautiful picture we have in Abraham's life of a man who had to learn this in some pretty serious ways, right? This isn't just like Abraham was worried that his paycheck wouldn't arrive at the bank on time. It's like, oh, I don't know if I can pay for the groceries because my direct deposit might be here on Thursday instead of on Wednesday. Okay, now you should trust God with your direct deposit. That's great. We're dealing with a pretty serious situation when Abraham is looking at having a kid with a woman who's not his wife. It's kind of a big deal. It's kind of a big deal for him when he goes in and sells his wife off to Pharaoh, right? That's a problem. These are big issues because he's not trusting God, and bad things have happened as a result. So you get to the end of Abraham's life, and he's saying, here's what I've learned, Isaac. Here's what I've learned, servant dude. You got to trust. You have to trust. Proverbs 3, 5 through 8. This might be on a little plaque in your house somewhere for good reason. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. Be not wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. It will be healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones. So, apart from just being a coffee mug or a little sign verse, Hobby Lobby, I'm sure has 8 things with this on it, what you should be considering with this is that this is wise counsel from a man who ultimately didn't follow it. Right? Solomon, in writing the Proverbs, didn't listen to himself. But God inspired him to write this, which is the greatest of counsels, to say that when you are pressed up against the wall, when you feel like there is a situation in which I really don't know which way to go, here's what you can do. Just trust. Trust that the Lord will take care of what he has promised to take care of. So don't be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. Don't try to concoct some strange way of going about this and monkeying around with things and putzing around. It's like, oh yes, I know Isaac needs a wife, so I'm going to put out a personal ad on a cuneiform thing. I'm going to send it out, and they're going to roll it around, and then the people and the surrounding areas are going to know rich guy's son needs a wife, and then the bachelor is going to happen, and these ladies are going to show up, right? This seems like it's something that could be successful, right? I'm sure he could have found a wife for Isaac that way, but that's not what happened. What happened is he trusted God to take care of it. He wasn't wise in his own eyes. It took him 100 and whatever years later, but it happened. Be encouraged, Christian. So providence is small and great. Verses 10 through 21. Then the servant took 10 of his master's camels and departed, taking all sorts of choice gifts from his master. And he arose and went to Mesopotamia to the city of Nahor. And he made the camels kneel down outside the city by the well of water at the time of evening, the time when women go out to draw water. So he knows where the ladies are going to be, right? They're going to be this place, getting some water. And he said, O Lord, God of my master Abraham, please grant me success today and show steadfast love to my master Abraham. Behold, I'm standing by the spring of water, and the daughters of the men of the city are coming out to draw water, that the young woman to whom I shall say, please let down your jar that I may drink, and who shall say, drink and I will water your camels, that her be the one whom you have appointed for your servant Isaac. By this I shall know that you have shown steadfast love to my master. Before he had finished speaking, behold, Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, Abraham's brother, came out with her water jar on her shoulder. The young woman was very attractive in appearance, a maiden whom no man had known. She went down to the spring and filled her jar and came up. Then the servant ran to meet her and said, please give me a little water to drink from your jar. She said, drink, my lord. And she quickly let down her jar upon her hand and gave him a drink. When she had finished giving him a drink, she said, I will draw water for your camels also, until they have finished drinking. So she quickly emptied her jar into the trough and ran again to the well to draw water, and she drew for all his camels. The man gazed at her in silence to learn whether the Lord had prospered his journey or not. So in the greatest matters of life, God is working in the smallest of details, and in the smallest of details, God is working the greatest matters of life. So again, this is not an instruction for how to find a wife. Okay? Just don't think that this is how you go about it, okay? What's happening here is you have a man, Abraham's servant, who has sworn an oath to his master saying, I am going to obey the God of Abraham by obeying Abraham's call as he is being obedient. So I'm going to honor him. And so he goes out, right? And so this is an act of faith in itself where Abraham's servant goes and he is just, all right, I'm going to go to the place that Abraham is from. I'm going to go there, and where are the ladies? The ladies are around the well. So this narrows it down a little bit, but it's not enough, right? You're not just going to go out and be like, you, come with me, right? That's a little weird. So what's happening here is Abraham's servant is praying, and he is asking God to make this clear to him. Now, again, this is not instructive as to be like, okay, God, if I am out driving today and the third car that I see is the license plate that starts with A, then that means I am supposed to go to South Korea next week. Okay, don't live that way. Okay, that's not what's happening here. What's happening here is the servant of Abraham is seeking Abraham's God and saying, only you can take care of this. Only you can take care of this. So I got to have some way to figure this out here. And I guess a good way to figure this out, and you think about what's being asked here of the woman, prospective wife, let her be hospitable. Let her be kind-hearted. Let her be generous, okay? This is not just like, give me a drink of water, I'm going to open up my great value bottle and here you have a drink, cool, go on your way. It took some time and took some effort to draw this water out of this well. And then she waters his camels. This isn't just like there's a trough over there. She is drawing a lot of water out of here. This is a significant thing. This is an industrious woman who is saying, yes, I want to be hospitable. I want to be welcoming even of this stranger who has come. She doesn't know who this guy is. And so on one level, yes, there is a kind of specificity that's being applied in the prayer of Abraham's servant, but it's pointing to something. He didn't say, may the woman with the certain inch waist be Isaac's wife. All right, it's may the woman who's demonstrating these characteristics that are good. So this is what's happening. And then I want you to see in this that these details matter. Because this isn't just find him a wife, throw it out at the board. It's specific details. And God is working in these specific details and then bringing this to pass. Again, in verse 21, the man gazed at her in silence to learn whether the Lord had prospered his journey or not. So think about what the servant of Abraham is doing here. He has prayed. He's asked God to give some clarity. And then something happens where it seems like this could be it. And then just get a picture of the sense of kind of wonder that's being exhibited by this man. And he gazed at her in silence to learn whether the Lord had prospered his journey or not. So he's just looking at her and thinking, was it really this easy? Did God just do this? You think how remarkable I think it is that God should tend to these little details. Think about how many pieces had to line up for this. Right? Think about the bathroom breaks along the way. Think about time to stop for food. Think about Rebecca, who gets up in the morning. She's like, I got stuff to do today. Maybe she got delayed and she was out scrubbing some clothes. I don't know, but everything lined up in such a way that this woman was brought to the servant of Abraham at this time. And in this, I just want you to appreciate we'll use the meticulous providence of God. Right? There's nothing around you right now that's out of order. Okay? Things seem like it, and things aren't working the way that we would like them to work, but rest assured, God is working out his purposes. You don't need to worry about that. Proverbs 16:9, the heart of man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps. How many times have you and I tried to do things that seem like good ideas? It just doesn't work out. Right? How many times have we tried to do things that would have been terrible ideas? that the Lord has stopped. Right? You're never going to understand. I will never understand the ways in which God has ordered every single step. I mean, every part of your body, every cell, every heartbeat. The Lord is ordering. Meticulous providence again in Proverbs 16. The lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord. So if you like playing games, right? I love playing games with my son, playing games, nerdy games with friends, and part of these games tend to be like roll some dice or draw some cards, and what's it going to be? We talk about games of chance. It doesn't exist, right? It may seem like chance to us, right? We're not ordering these things, but rest assured, not one thing is happening in this world apart from God's superintending wisdom. Daniel chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar, not a good dude, does some bad things, really bad things, destroys a lot of people, takes a lot of people away from Jerusalem. Bad things happen at the hand of Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar in his arrogance exalts himself, tries to exalt himself at least above God. Right? Remember that the place where Nebuchadnezzar erects this giant image where people are supposed to fall down and worship him, basically the same place that the Tower of Babel had been built. Right? So the plain of Shinar. Not a good place. Self-exaltation, human pride on display. And so Nebuchadnezzar gets so full of himself, he gets to the point of saying that he himself is to be worshipped like God. And God says, no, you're not. And as an aside, what an immense kindness it would be for God to stop any of us in our tracks to say, you're not me. Please reconsider. So Nebuchadnezzar has some stuff happen, right? Has a Howard Hughes kind of experience. And then this goes on. At the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my reason returned to me. So he's out of his mind. He's lost it for a while. Long fingernails, running around on the ground, eating like animals. I mean, just strange stuff. God humbles him. My reason returned to me. So what does it look like for somebody's reason to return to him? What does it look like to be a reasonable person? It's found in this. I blessed the Most High and praised and honored him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are counted as nothing, and he does according to his will among the host of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay his hand or say to him, what have you done? So if you want to be a reasonable person, here's how you be a reasonable person, right? We talk about the fear of the Lord as the beginning of wisdom. Fear of the Lord consists of a number of different aspects in how we relate to God, but here is one pretty big way is to say, you're God. I'm not. You're the king. I'm not. And each of us have in our hearts this desire, right? This is just built into the first sin, right? To try to strive after God's prerogative, to strive after his place, to say, I really know what's best. I'll agree with you, God, when you agree with me, but when it comes to just kind of making sure I have my own, I can take care of that much better than you can. If you want to be a reasonable person, just acknowledge that the Lord is God. Just acknowledge that. It's going to be good for you. Again, verse 21, the man gazed at her in silence to learn whether the Lord had prospered his journey or not. Here's what I encourage you to do, Christian. When you are put in a position of obedience, meaning that spot where you feel like I've really, there's a knife's edge that I'm walking right now between falling off to one side and disobedience, which seems practically helpful, pragmatic for me to pursue. This is going to benefit me somehow. And I don't see how obedience to God, it seems very abstract. It seems like this isn't going to actually work out any the better for me. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to just stop and for you to, like the servant of Abraham did here, gaze in silence at what God has done. And to just consider, God has brought you here. Can you not trust him for another hour? Can you not trust him for another day, another week, another month, another year? Can you not trust him? So faithfulness leads to faithfulness. This is where we find ourselves then. When the camels had finished drinking, the man took a gold ring weighing a half shekel and 2 bracelets for her arms weighing 10 gold shekels. So there's a lot of bling. There's a lot of stuff here he's bringing to her. And said, "Please tell me whose daughter you are. Is there room in your father's house for us to spend the night?" She said to him, "I'm the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nahor." She added, "We have plenty of both straw and fodder and room to spend the night." The man bowed his head and worshiped the Lord and said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his steadfast love and his faithfulness toward my master. As for me, the Lord has led me in the way to the house of my master's kinsman." So, this is a pretty cool spot, right? Where you have Abraham's servant seeing God work on behalf of his people and his faithfulness and his master's faithfulness to God rewarded, as it were. So because God is faithfully working for the best interests of his people can live in faithful obedience. So if you have this settled in your heart that God is indeed to be trusted, right? Abraham learned this lesson. God is to be trusted. And if you've settled this in your heart, that God is working even the smallest of details to accomplish his purposes, what does this mean, Christian, for you? That means you are freed up to honor God. You're freed up to obey him because you don't have to worry about making sure every detail is at work for you because God is taking care of it himself. And this is a really huge thing to internalize and to live regularly in light of. Because we are constantly being encouraged, we are constantly being instructed, constantly being taught by the world around us that the best thing that we can do is to make sure that we cover our bases, right? That we're doing this. And this is no knock on insurance, right? Insurance is important to have. We just had to use it this past week. But you think, how does insurance sale typically work? And somebody comes to your door, they knock, and they say, "What would happen to you if?" Just think how dreadful a thing it would be if this should occur. Now, again, it's not a knock on insurance per se. Okay, get some life insurance, have car insurance. These are important things. But really, what is the insurance culture teaching us? Why does it thrive in Western society? Why does it thrive in 21st century American society? It thrives because we don't trust anybody except ourselves. And in the off chance that we can't take care of ourselves, well, somebody better be there to take care of us. And I'm going to make sure that they're there to take care of me. So if I just give them a few extra bucks a month, I've got, what is the 3-word phrase? Peace of mind. You know what's a better peace of mind to have? That God is working all things to bring you in conformity to the image of his Son. When you sleep tonight, you can have peace of mind knowing that God is working on your behalf in all things. Not some things, not in church things, not in spiritual things only. He is working on your behalf in all things. And he can be trusted. He can be trusted. And you can live in faithful obedience. Verses 50 through 56, toward the end of the chapter, Laban and Bethuel answered. So again, here's Laban, and Laban is not a good guy. He's tricksy, right? Laban and Bethuel answered and said, "The thing has come from the Lord. We cannot speak to you bad or good. Behold, Rebekah is before you. Take her and go and let her be the wife of your master's son, as the Lord has spoken." So Laban is Rebekah's big brother. He's watching out for her, but he's not just watching out for her. He's watching out for himself, as we'll see as he relates to Rachel and Leah later on. We have Laban. He's introduced here. And then this follows. When Abraham's servant heard their words, he bowed himself to the earth before the Lord, and the servant brought out jewelry of silver and of gold and garments and gave them to Rebekah. He also gave to her brother and to her mother costly ornaments. So he's unloading stuff. This is part of the bride price. It's like, okay, here's some stuff. Here's some money. Here's some gold, everything like that. We've got to take care of this now. And he and the men who were with him ate and drank, and they spent the night there. When they arose in the morning, he said, "Send me away to my master." Her brother and her mother said, "Let the young woman remain with us a while, these 10 days. After that she may go." But he said to them, "Do not delay me. since the Lord has prospered my way. Send me away that I may go to my master. So what's happening? Like, what is significant about this? Why does this have anything to do with your obedience? Anything to do with obedience generally? Here's what's going on here. We don't know exactly what's being offered to the servant of Abraham at this point. We don't know exactly how Laban, whom again we come to know later, is a tricksy guy. But what we do know is this man has known enough and seen enough of God's work on behalf of his people to say, I just got to go back because that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm not going to tarry. I'm not going to sit around here. I'm not going to wait around. I'm not going to even listen to the words of this person. It seems like it might be an important part of Rebekah's life. What I'm going to do, I'm going to go back, and I'm not going to turn to the left or to the right. I'm going to set my face. I'm just going to do what I'm supposed to do. And why can he do this? Because God can be trusted. He doesn't need to curry favor with Laban. He doesn't need to do anything except say, all right, this is what I'm supposed to do, and now it's to go home. So Christian, when you're in that moment where you think, okay, obedience, yeah, maybe tomorrow. Like I can just hang out for a while. Remember, what did we see with Lot? Earlier in Genesis, Lot kind of like hedges his bets. It's like, don't do that. Christian, don't do that. Don't be the kind of person who says, I and God can do this. Just be obedient, be faithful. Deuteronomy 29, Moses summoned all Israel and said to them, you have seen all that the Lord did before your eyes in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all his servants and to all his land, the great trials that your eyes saw, the signs and those great wonders. But to this day, the Lord has not given you a heart to understand, or eyes to see, or ears to hear. So there's some foreshadowing here, right? He's talking about the deadness of the people's hearts, but he's also saying, you've seen God faithfully working on your behalf. You've seen this happen. So what does that call for? What does it call for when you see and you perceive God's faithful work on your behalf? So I've led you 40 years in the wilderness. Your clothes have not worn out on you, and your sandals have not worn off your feet. You have not eaten bread, and you have not drunk wine or strong drink, that you may know that I am the Lord your God. And when you came to this place, Sihon, the king of Heshbon, and Og, the king of Bashan, came out against us to battle, but we defeated them. We took their land and gave it for an inheritance to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of the Manassites. Therefore, keep the words of this covenant and do them, that you may prosper in all that you do. So what Moses is saying here, and obviously the people don't listen, right? They don't listen at all. But what he's saying is, if you've seen God work on your behalf, if you have seen him doing these things, if you have seen him working for your good, then you have every reason to trust him and obey him. Every reason. Don't take that and just kind of compartmentalize, like, yeah, but I don't know, but that just, right? And here's how we see the ultimate pinnacle of this. Where do we see God working most clearly on behalf of his people? It's in the sending of his son. Your greatest need isn't to have a wife. Your greatest need isn't to have camels and bracelets. It's certainly not to have a nice job and a sweet ride. And you would have a mediator. That you would have a substitute. So that you wouldn't have to lay in the place of Isaac, right? Where Isaac is bound on the altar. That you would have somebody step in your place. And so when you consider the cross of Christ, when you consider that God takes on human flesh and he stands in the place of guilty sinners and he absorbs the punishment due guilty sinners and he rises from the dead to show his mastery over death, you can trust him. You can trust him. When he calls you to obedience, you can trust him because this God has been faithful to you. He has been faithful to his people. He has given his son. And as Paul said, how will he not also with him graciously give us all things? Right? What more can he give you than that, Christian? I'm just going to finish here in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, because I think it's important for us just to kind of go back to this and revisit what's happening here, because I think this is probably one of the hardest places for Christian people to find obedience to God, something that's palatable, okay? Because on the one hand, we're not Amish, okay? Multiple reasons we're not Amish. Bad theology. But Christian people live in a world, right, that we are strangers and aliens in, but we're still living in this world. We're not creating our own little communes. We're not, like the village. Sometimes I feel like it. I mentioned this past week, I thought like the village, let's start the village up because things get weird, right? But we can't do that. We can't do that. So we're not Amish. But at the same time, when the Apostle John, 1 John chapter 2, says, do not love the world or the things in the world. It's like these things are passing away. These things are past. Don't have your heart's affections set on them. We can oftentimes think like, well, who can make these things work for me? How can I be satisfied and fulfilled? And that can happen because maybe this person can help me with this. Maybe this step of disobedience, I know it's not right, but again, right, God will understand. Here's how Paul puts it in 2 Corinthians chapter 6. He says, don't be unequally yoked with unbelievers. Now, what does that mean? I don't think any farmers in here don't farm. What does unequally yoked mean? Let's say you've got a big ox and a little ox. You've got an ox that's alive, an ox that's dead, right? Just think of disparate situations between oxen. It's like, it would be a bad idea to take a yoke for an ox that's a big, strong ox and yoke it to a dead ox. That's not going to work. Right? It ain't going to work for you. Try to do that. No amount of plowing is going to be helped by the fact you've got a dead ox yoked to a big, strong ox. Paul says, don't be unequally yoked with unbelievers. What partnership has righteousness with lawlessness? What fellowship is light with darkness? What accord has Christ with Belial? It's another word for the devil. Or what portion does a believer share with an unbeliever? What agreement has the temple of God with idols? For we are the temple of the living God. As God said, I will make my dwelling among them and walk among them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Therefore, go out from their midst and be separate from them, says the Lord, and touch no unclean thing, then I will welcome you. And I will be a father to you, and you shall be sons and daughters to me, says the Lord Almighty. Since we have these promises, beloved, let's cleanse ourselves from every defilement of body and spirit, bringing holiness to completion in the fear of God. It may not be an issue for you where it's like, hey, I'm trying to decide between loneliness and being with somebody, but they don't love Christ, right? And wonderfully and miraculously, God has worked in marriages over the years to see an unbelieving spouse brought to faith in Christ, the witness of a believing spouse. That's a beautiful thing. But it's not what you're supposed to try for, right? Just like Isaac looking for a lady, and Abraham says, let's get one we know is already in the household. Maybe you're not in that spot where you're dealing with it in terms of a relationship, but certainly you might find yourself in a position in a work environment where you might be called to cut a corner and to just kind of to mesh your Christian witness with a way that does not witness to Christ very well. And what Paul is saying here is look, obedience means you can't push these things together too hard. You're going to have to deal with the world. You're going to have to do that. But don't find yourself so caught up in it that you become undifferentiatable. You're the same. Right? Was talking to a brother a couple weeks ago who had mentioned that he had found some great success doing something. And he got to a point where somebody had mentioned, you know what? I see you're doing this all the time. And this brother was sobered by that. He thought yeah, and you know what they don't know me for? It was a beautiful picture of God just calling somebody to his senses and saying, I'm supposed to be different. I'm not supposed to be Amish, but I'm supposed to be different. And I bring this up here for you not because I'm trying to ride a hobby horse or anything. I'm just bringing it up for you here because this is probably one of the most difficult areas of Christian obedience that you will ever encounter. It's probably one of the most difficult areas because it doesn't feel good to say no to people. It doesn't feel good to turn down the drink. It doesn't feel good to turn down the request to go to the hotel room. It's much easier to say yes. But if you have a God working on your behalf in all things, and he has been faithful to you, you can obey. You can honor him. And the most beautiful thing we see in this is that God has promised us, he said, I will honor those who honor me. He'll take care of you. Don't make a Hagar-Ishmael situation. Just trust. Learn from Abraham's mistakes. Learn from Abraham's obedience here. And then just look and gaze and say, this is God's fingerprints all over it. He's been faithful to me, and I can trust him.